Thank you, Justice Akbar Ali, Mr. Kapil Sibal, Mr. Ilango, distinguished guests. I'm here mainly as a moderator, and in keeping with the wishes of Mr. Kapil Sibal, a conversationalist, because he thought it would be a good idea to engage in an informal, free conversation, but on the subject that he has spoken. His lecture is about, and that's what I'll do. But before that, I want to pay my tribute to Rakesh and the wonderful family of which he was a part. We cannot possibly overpraise the strength of character and the moral courage of Mr. Ilango, his wife, and other members of the family in taking this decision to transition from inconsolable grief, a terrible happening, to this point where we celebrate institutionally the life just cut off and wonderful spirit of a young man, I think cannot possibly be overpraised. And the Rakesh Law Foundation, which has been inaugurated today, in the presence of the Chief Minister and by a very distinguished lecturer, I think has been rightly constituted. It's dedicated to justice and equity. The endowment is in the right place, the Roja Muthaya Research Library, and I'm sure year after year, along the lines indicated by Mr. Ilango in his very moving but powerful speech, I think this will go forward, and we look forward to this annual lecture on various subjects. He's made it clear it's not going to be very narrow. Its focus will be on these values, justice and equity, and it is, he said, is going to be apolitical in the formal sense, although you cannot avoid politics when you deal with these values and principles. The theme addressed with erudition and powerful insights in this inaugural lecture by Mr. Kapil Sibal is the content and state of democracy, the quality of democracy today in relation to the Constitution. And he has stayed entirely within the framework of the Constitution in elucidating his ideas and presenting his impressions and also assessments, which are being backed up. I think every strong statement, every insight has been substantiated, and I think that's a valuable part of this this inaugural lecture. The transformative living Constitution, although it's got its imperfections, and our democratic assets, Parliament and state legislatures, the executive at the center and in the states, political parties, the judiciary, other institutions that function under constitutional or statutory authority, the news media, civil society organizations, and in the final analysis, we, the people of India, individually and collectively, to quote from the Constitution itself, all these have a vital role to play in this. And the Constitution has been designed, and the democratic, at least formally democratic institutions are all formally pledged to promote fealty not to any strongman or to any kind of majoritarianism, but to the core values of the Indian Republic as set out in the preamble. And in this order, I think the order is important: justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. So we have heard in this brilliant inaugural lecture how seriously these values, the law and the courts of law have taken these values. That matters a good deal, but how society and the political system respond to them matters, I think, even more. I just want to recall something, since Mr. Ilango referred to Dr. Ambedkar in connection with the questions asked by his son. In his last speech to the Constituent Assembly, made on November 25, 1949, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, chairman of the drafting committee, brought out clearly and powerfully the importance of understanding the interdependence of the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and getting what he called the union of Trinity right. He warned, of course, against internal threats to democracy and society such as bhakti or hero worship in politics, to which Indians were particularly addicted. It's quite possible, he mused, for this newborn democracy to retain its form but give place to dictatorship. In fact, if there's a landslide, and he was no doubt referring to an electoral landslide, the danger of the second possibility becoming actuality is much greater, he said. In support of this argument, Dr. Ambedkar recalled John Stuart Mill's famous caution to people interested in the maintenance of democracy not to lay their liberties at the feet of even a great man or to treat him with powers which enable him to subvert their institutions. But equally important, and I think this came out very clearly in this inaugural lecture, was Dr. Ambedkar's warning in his speech against letting the complete absence of two things in Indian society, equality, that is social and economic, and fraternity, continue unchecked. That is the absence of two things in Indian society, social and economic equality. Mr. Kapil Sibal also spoke about political justice here, and fraternity continue unchecked. If the contradiction between recognizing what he called the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value in social and economic life was not, in politics, the contradiction between the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value in politics, and denying the principle of one man, one value, or equality in social and economic life, if this contradiction was not resolved, he said, political democracy could not be expected to survive. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions, he demanded. How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? If we continue to deny it for long, we will do so only by putting our political democracy in peril. We must remove this contradiction, he said, at the earliest possible moment, or else those who suffer from equality, I think this is very important, will blow up the structure of political democracy which this assembly has so laboriously built up. Mr. Kapil Sibal has touched on these issues, focused on some of them, but entered it in a different way by focusing on how what the Constitution fundamentally intended or designed has been honored mainly in the breach by the constitution of the various institutions as well as their functioning, he said. And he illustrated it with great insight and persuasive power. Of course, there could be differences on this, some in the audience, and normally a lecture of this kind ends with the lecture and there are no questions, but Mr. Kapil Sibal has thought it was appropriate that a subject like this should involve more people, and it will start with a conversation, but also there will be opportunities, at least to a limited extent, for questions which he will answer.